Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Let's Max Warframe. Today we're going to be taking a look at another of the Syndicate secondary weapons, the Rakta Ballistica. The Rakta is available through the new local Syndicate store for the costly sum of 100,000 standing, requiring the rank of Exalted. Alternatively, this can be bought from the trade chat, so what exactly do you get for your money? Well, you get a weapon that fires in a 4-round burst with the option to fire a single charge shot at a time, dealing 25 damage on a non-charge attack, 20 of which comes in the form of impact, with the remaining 5 being split equally between slash and puncture. The huge damage, however, comes when you charge the weapon. When fully charged, the Rakta lets off a pinpoint accurate round that deals 4 times the damage. This can be amazingly useful against heavier units, whilst keeping the standard attack for the lighter units to kill. Now, the Rakta also comes with no critical chance on non-charge attacks, but a fairly reasonable 15% on the charge. A base status of a pretty average 10%, and is completely silent. The main changes come when you compare it to its predecessor, the Standard Ballistica, where it essentially swaps the slash and impact damage around, not increasing, just swapping the 20 slash on the Standard to 20 impact on the Rakta. It also gets a slightly larger magazine of 20, allowing for 5 bursts before reloading. Let's quickly talk about the greatest asset that this weapon has, the Blight proc built into this weapon. As with all of the other Syndicate procs, it requires 2000 affinity to be gained to charge a meter, and when that meter is fully charged, it releases a blast of 1000 viral damage, and procs on all enemies in a certain radius. Restores 25% of the Warframe's max energy, and buffs movement speed by 10% for 30 seconds. Now, I have to admit, I think this is probably my favourite out of all of the Syndicate AoEs, because viral pretty much has a place at the table against every single faction along the line. And you can't really argue with halving the health of surrounding enemies every time you proc. I'm absolutely loving the utility of this, and will have a place in my arsenal on some weapon or another. The weapon itself isn't immune to downsides, however. Firstly, is a downside only when you compare it to the other Syndicate weapons. It gets no increased damage output over the Standard Ballistica, meaning that if it wasn't for the Blight effect, this would barely be worth taking over that Standard Ballistica. It also probably has the most bizarre recoil pattern of any weapon I've ever seen, which is a horizontal recoil. I'll be honest, I have no idea the reason why, and when you look closely at the weapon, it makes literally no sense. However, this is a feature that does take getting some used to. It also comes with some travel time, but realistically with a bit of practice that can be negated to some extent. Okay, so let's move on to starting to mod the Rakta Ballistica. Now, as you can see, I've added 4 former to this weapon. However, you actually only realistically need 3, as I actually have changed my build since I originally went on and put the former on this weapon. Now, it comes with a V and a D as standard, so the first thing we are going to do is use one of those former to get rid of that D slot. And I mean, unless there is something that D knows that they're not telling us in terms of new D slot polarity weapons mods that are coming, then it's just, there's no point in having it on the weapon. It's more of a hindrance than a help. Now, we've got 3 mods that are going to remain the same between all 3 of our builds. We've got Hornet Strike, Barrel Diffusion and Lethal Torrent. And as you can see, there is no Magnum Force on there. And after the modding part of this video, I'm just going to do a quick side-by-side just to show the reason why. The non-charged build isn't too bad in terms of the accuracy loss, but the charged build just goes all over the place. And you will see that, like I say, after the modding part. So in terms of modding this weapon for our Grenier build, we're going to go with Heated Charge, Scorch and Jolt, which is going to bring up radiation damage, and Frostbite and Pathogen rounds, which is going to bring up viral. Now, previously I was using 3 of the 11-point dash polarity mods, and that's why there are so many of the mod points left over, because I formed for that specific build. However, I have decided to put a little bit more status on the weapon, and put the 3rd dual stat elemental and status mod on there, at the loss of a little bit of elemental damage. And personally, I think that makes for a better build, but then that's personal preference. You can go with the max elemental if you wish. I just feel that having a little bit more status on there helps this weapon out a ton. Now, looking at our Corpus build, we're going to go Convulsion, Jolt and Frostbite, which is going to bring up the magnetic damage against the shields. to combine with the very good impact damage, which is going to help a ton against the shielded units, and pistol, pestilence and pathogen rounds to bring up the toxin damage, which is going to really cut through the shields and kill those fleshier units, things like your techs and your crewmen. Now going on to the void units, we're going to go with pathogen rounds, jolt and pistol pestilence to bring up corrosive damage, and scorch and heated charge to deal with those Grineer based void units a little bit better, especially since we've got very good impact damage already to deal with the shielded units in the void, things like the corpus crewmen, the corrupted crewmen and the fusion mowers.
We are readying reinforcements. Keep fighting, Tenno.
Okay, so now on to my recommendation and whether the Rakta Ballistica is worth the effort and worth the grind. And I'm going to say that yes it is. When I originally picked up the standard Ballistica, I immediately put it down again once I hit 30 because I really didn't appreciate the weapon at all. And honestly, at first glance the Rakta is exactly the same. It only really starts picking up in terms of being a decent weapon once you put a few former into it. I personally didn't think it was that good until I put at least 2 former in. But the thing about the weapon is that in comparing it to the other syndicate weapons, it's no contest. This falls so far behind in damage is incredible. The Rakta easily got the worst in terms of direct upgrades to the weapon. No extra damage, no extra crit, no extra status, only a swap damage type and a bit more magazine size. It really falls a bit short in the syndicate comparisons, but taking them out of the equation, it's a pretty solid weapon, only made better by that incredible blight proc. Now in terms of taking this weapon further, I would wait and see what DE do, if they buff the weapon or not. The way I went before with 4 former was to use all those 11-point elemental mods, which is a perfectly good build, but I felt that it was lacking slightly in the status department, which is the reason I chose to drop a little elemental and go with a slightly more status build. One thing I can see happening is if they buff this weapon is an increase in that status chance, which would mean going back with the 4 former 11-point elemental build would actually be viable. But then there's no real second guessing as to whether it's even going to get buffed at all. So it's really not worth going off the back of a hunch. So in essence, it's the weakest of the syndicate weapons, but still a solid secondary. The Rakta got a bad start with the lack of direct upgrades to the weapon features, but when modded correctly can deal with most situations very well, and dish out a decent amount of damage in the process. As always, many thanks for watching. Please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, it helps me out a ton. And I shall see you in the next episode.